It was supposed to be a fresh start. After years of grinding in the corporate world, Marcus Bennett had finally achieved his dream of owning a home in the prestigious Willow Creek Estates. The neighborhood was everything he had ever wanted: quiet, elegant, and surrounded by lush greenery. The house itself was a modern two-story with a sleek design, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a backyard that overlooked a small lake. It was the kind of place where Marcus imagined he would grow old, maybe even start a family. But from the moment he moved in, something felt off. The first sign of trouble came just a week after he settled in. Marcus was in the middle of unpacking boxes when he heard a sharp knock on his door. Standing on his porch was a woman in her late 50s, dressed in a pastel pink cardigan and a pearl necklace. Her blonde hair was perfectly coiffed, and her smile was as cold as the ice in her voice. "Good afternoon," she said, her tone dripping with faux politeness. "I'm Eleanor Grayson, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. Welcome to the neighborhood." Marcus extended his hand, but Eleanor ignored it, her eyes scanning his property with a critical gaze. "I noticed you've already made some changes to the exterior," she said, gesturing to the potted plants Marcus had placed on his porch. "Just a few flowers," Marcus replied, trying to keep his tone light. "I thought they'd add a bit of color." Eleanor's lips tightened into a thin line. "I'm afraid you'll need to submit a formal request for any alterations to your property. Even something as simple as potted plants requires HOA approval." Marcus blinked, taken aback. "You're joking, right?" Eleanor's expression didn't waver. "I don't joke about HOA regulations, Mr. Bennett. We take our community standards very seriously here at Willow Creek." And with that, she handed him a thick binder filled with rules and regulations before turning on her heel and walking away. Marcus quickly learned that Eleanor Grayson wasn't just the HOA president, she was the self-proclaimed queen of Willow Creek. For years, she had ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist, enforcing petty rules and regulations with a zeal that bordered on obsession. Residents who dared to defy her found themselves buried under a mountain of fines, legal threats, and social ostracism. At first, Marcus tried to play along. He submitted the necessary paperwork for his potted plants, adjusted his trash bins to the exact inch as specified in the HOA guidelines, and even repainted his front door to match the approved color palette. But no matter how much he complied, Eleanor always found something new to criticize. "Your lawn is looking a bit overgrown," she remarked one morning, standing on his driveway with her arms crossed. "We expect all residents to maintain a pristine appearance." Marcus glanced at his lawn, which was neatly trimmed and perfectly manicured. "It's been less than a week since I mowed it," he said, trying to keep his frustration in check. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "A week is too long, Mr. Bennett. We have standards to uphold." Things came to a head when Marcus received his first official violation notice. The letter, printed on thick ivory paper with the HOA's golden seal, listed a series of infractions: unauthorized landscaping, improper trash bin placement, and failure to submit proof of ownership. The fines totaled nearly due law $1,000, and the letter ended with a chilling warning: failure to comply may result in immediate evict time. Marcus was furious. He had bought the house outright, paid all his taxes, and followed every rule to the letter. Yet here he was, being threatened with evict tie-in over a few potted plants. He decided to fight back. Marcus began documenting everything. He installed security cameras around his property, meticulously recorded every interaction with Eleanor, and filed away every HOA notice and fine. But he didn't stop there. He started digging into Eleanor's past, searching for any dirt he could use against her. What he found shocked him. Eleanor didn't own her house outright. In fact, she was deeply in debt. A quick search of public records revealed that her home was under a second mortgage, and the loan was in default. Even more interesting was the fact that the loan had been sold to a private investment firm, a firm that Marcus happened to own. Years ago, Marcus had diversified his investments by purchasing distressed properties and defaulted loans under a corporate entity. One of those loans was Eleanor's. Armed with this information, Marcus attended the next HOA meeting. The room was packed with residents, all of whom had been summoned by Eleanor to discuss Marcus's egregious violations. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, flanked by her loyal board members, her expression smug as she prepared to deliver her verdict. "Mr. Bennett, she began, her voice dripping with condescension, you have repeatedly violated our community standards. As such, the board has voted to enforce an emergency compliance action. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. The room fell silent as Marcus stood up. He walked to the front of the room, his expression calm, but his eyes sharp. I decline, he said simply. Eleanor blinked, caught off guard. Excuse me. I decline to vacate, Marcus repeated. You see, Eleanor, I have something you don't proof of ownership. He pulled out a stack of documents and placed them on the table. This is a copy of my property deed, stamped and verified by the county clerk's office. And this, he said, sliding another document forward, is the foreclosure notice for your home. You see, Eleanor, I own your house. The room erupted into chaos. Board members whispered furiously among themselves, while Eleanor sat frozen, her face pale. This is impossible, she whispered. Marcus leaned forward, his voice cold. It's very possible, Eleanor. And by your own rules, non-homeowners cannot remain in Willow Creek. You have 30 days to vacate. Eleanor's reign was over. The board, once loyal to her, turned against her in an instant. A recall vote was called, and within minutes, Eleanor was stripped of her position as HOA president. She left the meeting in disgrace, her world crumbling around her. But Eleanor wasn't one to go down without a fight. Desperate and humiliated, she turned to more drastic measures. She hired thugs to vandalize Marcus's property, filed false complaints with the city, and even attempted to break into his home. But Marcus was ready for her. He had anticipated her every move and set a trap. When the police arrived at Eleanor's door in the middle of the night, she knew she had lost. She was arrested on multiple charges, including conspiracy to commit burglary and property damage. The trial was swift, and the evidence against her was overwhelming. In the end, Eleanor was found guilty and sentenced to 5 years of probation, a hefty fine, and a permanent restraining order against Marcus. As Eleanor packed her bags and prepared to leave Willow Creek, she couldn't help but feel a sense of bitter irony. She had spent years ruling the neighborhood with an iron fist, dictating who could stay and who had to go. Now, she was the one being forced out. Marcus stood in his front yard, watching as Eleanor loaded the last of her belongings into a moving van. He gave her a single nod, not mocking or gloating, but a simple acknowledgement of the truth she had brought this on herself. As the van drove away, Marcus felt a sense of relief. The nightmare was over. But as he turned to walk back into his house, he couldn't shake the feeling that Willow Creek would never be the same. The fall of the suburban queen had left a void, and Marcus knew that someone would eventually try to fill it. But for now, he was content to enjoy his hard-won peace. Claire Thompson was a stark contrast to Eleanor Grayson. Where Eleanor had been rigid and authoritarian, Claire was approachable and diplomatic. She had been elected as the new HOA president after Eleanor's fall from grace, and her first order of business was to restore trust between the residents and the HOA. She promised transparency, fairness, and a more collaborative approach to community governance. Marcus watched her closely. He had learned the hard way that power in Willow Creek could corrupt even the most well-intentioned individuals. But Claire seemed different. She held open forums where residents could voice their concerns, and she made it clear that the HOA's role was to serve the community, not control it. For a while, things were peaceful. Marcus even found himself attending HOA meetings, something he had avoided like the plague during Eleanor's reign. He appreciated Claire's efforts to create a more inclusive environment, and he began to feel a sense of belonging in the neighborhood. But peace in Willow Creek was always fragile. The first sign of trouble came when a new family moved into the neighborhood. The Garcias were a young couple with 2 children, and they had bought the house next door to Marcus. They were friendly and eager to integrate into the community, but they quickly ran afoul of the HOA's strict regulations. Claire tried to mediate, but some of the older residents were resistant to change. They complained about the Garcias children playing in the street, their dog barking, and their unapproved garden decorations. The complaints were petty, but they were enough to stir up tension. Marcus found himself caught in the middle. He liked the Garcias and wanted to support them, but he also understood the importance of maintaining community standards. He tried to talk to Claire about finding a compromise, but she seemed overwhelmed by the growing division among the residents. As the weeks went by, the tension in Willow Creek escalated. The older residents, led by a retired lawyer named Harold Jenkins, began to push back against Claire's more lenient approach. They accused her of being too soft and argued that the neighborhood was losing its prestige. Claire tried to hold the community together, but the pressure was mounting. She found herself constantly on the defensive, trying to balance the demands of the older residents with the needs of the newer families. Marcus could see that Claire was struggling, and he knew that if something didn't change, the neighborhood would descend into chaos. He decided to take matters into his own hands. Marcus called a meeting of the newer residents, including the Garcias and a few other families who had moved into Willow Creek in the past year. He proposed forming a coalition to push for changes in the HOA's bylaws. They needed to modernize the rules and make them more inclusive, or the neighborhood would continue to fracture. The group agreed, and they began drafting a proposal to present at the next HOA meeting. They called for more flexible landscaping guidelines, designated play areas for children, and a more transparent process for handling complaints. Marcus knew it wouldn't be easy. The older residents would resist any changes, and Harold Jenkins was sure to fight them every step of the way. But he also knew that if they didn't act now, the neighborhood would never heal. The next HOA meeting was packed. The tension in the room was palpable as Marcus stood up to present the coalition's proposal. He spoke passionately about the need for change, emphasizing that the neighborhood's strength lay in its diversity and willingness to adapt. Harold Jenkins was the first to respond. He dismissed the proposal as reckless and argued that it would undermine the community's standards. "We built this neighborhood on certain principles," he said, his voice rising. "We can't just throw them out because a few newcomers don't like the rules." The room erupted into arguments, with residents shouting over each other. Claire tried to restore order, but it was clear that she had lost control of the meeting. Marcus stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chaos. "This isn't about throwing out the rules," he said. "It's about making sure they work for everyone. If we don't adapt, we'll lose what makes this neighborhood special." The room fell silent as Marcus's words sank in. Even Harold Jenkins seemed momentarily speechless. Claire called for a vote on the proposal. The room was dead, but Marcus's coalition had done their work. They had reached out to residents, explained the benefits of the changes, and addressed their concerns. When the votes were counted, the proposal passed by a narrow margin. The older residents were furious, but the newer families celebrated. For the first time in years, Willow Creek felt like a community again. The changes didn't happen overnight. There were still disagreements and challenges, but the neighborhood began to heal. Claire's leadership, combined with Marcus's determination, helped bridge the divide between the old and new residents. Marcus found himself taking on a more active role in the community. He joined the HOA board, not because he wanted power, but because he wanted to ensure that the neighborhood remained a place where everyone felt welcome. As he stood on his porch one evening, watching the Garcias children play in the street, Marcus felt a sense of pride. Willow Creek wasn't perfect, but it was home. And for now, that was enough. Marcus Bennett's first official act as HOA president was to call a community-wide meeting. He wanted to set the tone for his leadership open, transparent, and collaborative. The turnout was impressive, with both longtime residents and newer families filling the community center. Marcus stood at the front of the room, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also a sense of purpose. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice steady. "I know this neighborhood has been through a lot in the past year. We've had our disagreements, our conflicts, and our growing pains. But I believe we've also learned something important, that Willow Creek is at its best when we work together." He outlined his vision for the neighborhood, a place where rules were fair and enforced with compassion, where residents felt heard and valued, and where the community could grow without losing its identity. He proposed forming committees to address specific issues: landscaping, safety, community events, and encouraged everyone to get involved. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Even Harold Jenkins, who had been Marcus's staunchest opponent, nodded in reluctant approval. For the first time in years, it felt like Willow Creek was moving forward as one. Marcus's leadership was put to the test sooner than he expected. A few weeks into his term, a dispute arose between two neighbors over a shared fence. The issue had been festering for months, but under Eleanor's rule, it had been ignored. Now, It threatened to escalate into a full-blown feud. Marcus stepped in immediately. He met with both parties separately, listening to their concerns and frustrations. Then, he brought them together for a mediated discussion. It wasn't easy. Tempers flared, and old grievances resurfaced, but Marcus remained calm and patient. By the end of the meeting, the neighbors had reached a compromise, and the fence issue was resolved. Word of Marcus's handling of the situation spread quickly. Residents began to see him not just as a leader, but as a mediator who genuinely cared about the community. His approval ratings soared, and even Harold Jenkins admitted grudgingly that Marcus was doing a good job. Just as things were settling down, a major storm hit Willow Creek. Heavy rains and strong winds caused widespread damage, flooding streets, knocking down trees, and damaging homes. The neighborhood was in chaos, and residents looked to Marcus for guidance. He sprang into action, coordinating with local authorities and organizing volunteer teams to help with cleanup efforts. He worked tirelessly, going door to door to check on residents and ensure everyone was safe. His leadership during the crisis earned him even more respect, and the community rallied together in a way it hadn't in years. But the storm also revealed deeper issues. Some of the older homes in the neighborhood had sustained significant damage, exposing problems with outdated infrastructure. Marcus knew that addressing these issues would require significant investment and difficult decisions. Marcus called a special meeting to discuss the aftermath of the storm. He presented a proposal to create a neighborhood improvement fund, financed by a modest increase in HOA fees. The fund would be used to repair damaged infrastructure, upgrade utilities, and make the neighborhood more resilient to future storms. The proposal was met with mixed reactions. Some residents, particularly those with older homes, supported the idea. Others, especially those on fixed incomes, were hesitant. Harold Jenkins, ever the skeptic, argued that the HOA was overstepping its bounds. Marcus listened to all sides, then made his case. "This isn't just about fixing what's broken," he said. "It's about investing in our future. If we don't act now, the problems will only get worse and more expensive." After a lengthy debate, the proposal passed by a narrow margin. It was a hard-fought VY Tory, but Marcus knew it was just the beginning. Over the next year, Marcus worked tirelessly to implement the improvements. The neighborhood began to transform. Streets were repaved, utilities were upgraded, and new safety measures were put in place. The community garden, a project spearheaded by the Garcias, became a symbol of the neighborhood's renewal. But Marcus's greatest achievement was the sense of unity he helped foster. Residents who had once been at odds now worked together on community projects. The annual block party, which had been canceled for years, was revived and became a highlight of the summer. As his term as HOA president drew to a close, Marcus reflected on how far Willow Creek had come. It wasn't perfect. There were still disagreements and challenges, but it was a place where people felt connected and invested in each other's well-being. Marcus decided not to run for re-election. He had accomplished what he set out to do, and it was time for new leadership to take the reins. The Garcias, inspired by Marcus's example, decided to run for the HOA board. Their campaign focused on inclusive VY and sustainability, and they won by a landslide. At his final HOA meeting, Marcus stood before the residents one last time. "When I first moved to Willow Creek, I never imagined I'd end up here," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "But this neighborhood has taught me so much about leadership, about community, and about the power of coming together. I'm proud of what we've accomplished, and I know the best is yet to come." The room erupted into applause, and Marcus felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had helped transform Willow Creek, not just physically, but in spirit. Months later, Marcus sat on his porch, watching the sunset over the lake. The neighborhood was quiet, the air filled with the sound of laughter and conversation. He felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. As he sipped his coffee, a young couple walked by, pushing a stroller. They waved, and Marcus waved back, a smile on his face. Willow Creek was no longer just a place to live. It was a community, a home. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus knew that his work here was done. But the story of Willow Creek was far from over. It was just beginning. If you were the one in this story, how would you react? Would you stand up and fight back, or accept the unreasonable pressure and control from the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with more people. Your small action gives us the motivation to keep bringing you more intense and engaging stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.